You are born pink, impossibly tiny, and already wearing armor. Not the kind of armor that knights wear into battle, but something far more practical. A shell that looks like it was crafted by someone who took biology class way too seriously. You're a pink, fairy armadillo, and you've just entered a world that seems designed specifically to kill you. Your mother dug this burrow weeks ago, scraping through sandy soil with claws that could probably open a can if she needed to. It's not fancy, just a narrow tunnel that drops down about a foot before opening into a small chamber. No windows, no air conditioning, just dirt walls and the faint smell of roots. But it's home, and more importantly, it's hidden from everything that wants to eat you. You can't see much yet. Your eyes are barely open, and even when they are, there's not much to look at down here. Everything is darkness, and the warmth of your mother's body pressed against you. You have siblings, 2 others who hatched around the same time. They're just as small, just as pink, and just as confused about this whole existence thing. The 3 of you huddle together like the world's tiniest armored potatoes. Your mother doesn't stick around to give pep talks or life advice. She's got bigger problems to worry about, like finding enough food to keep producing milk. She disappears through the tunnel entrance, leaving you and your siblings alone in the chamber. This happens a lot. She'll vanish for hours at a time, and you never know if she's coming back or if something with sharp teeth has decided she looks tasty. When she does return, she's usually covered in dirt and carrying the scent of the surface world, a mixture of sand, dry grass, and something that might be insect guts. You don't know it yet, but that smell is going to define your entire existence. She settles down, and you and your siblings scramble toward her, competing for the best feeding position. There's no politeness here, no taking turns. If you want to eat, you push your way in and hope for the best. The milk is warm and rich, nothing like what you'll be eating later. It fills your tiny stomach and makes you drowsy, which is perfect because sleeping is basically your only skill at this point. You curl up against your siblings, your soft shell pressing against theirs, and drift off while your mother grooms herself with the dedication of someone who knows that cleanliness might be the difference between life and death. Outside this burrow, the world is vast and dangerous. The pampas stretch endlessly in every direction, grasslands that look peaceful from a distance, but hide predators behind every tuft of vegetation. Hawks circle overhead, scanning for movement. Foxes prowl through the grass, following scent trails. Even domestic dogs, the ones that belong to nearby farms, consider you a chew toy if they happen to stumble across you. But you don't know about any of that yet. Your world consists of this dark chamber, the warmth of your family, and the rhythmic sound of your mother's breathing when she's home. Sometimes you hear other noises filtering down through the soil, footsteps, bird calls, the distant rumble of machinery. Those sounds don't mean anything to you now, but they will soon enough. After a few weeks, your eyes open properly, and you start noticing details about your surroundings. The burrow walls are smooth in some places, rough in others, depending on the type of soil your mother encountered while digging. There are roots poking through here and there, and occasionally a small insect will wander into your chamber, which is exciting because it's literally the only entertainment you have. Your shell is still soft, more like thick skin than actual armor. It's pink because blood vessels run close to the surface, giving you that distinctive color that makes you look like someone dipped you in strawberry milk. The shell will harden as you get older, but for now, it's flexible enough that you can curl into a loose ball when you feel threatened. Not that there's much to feel threatened by down here, but instinct is instinct. Your siblings are growing at roughly the same pace you are, which means competition is about to get interesting. You're all developing the same basic needs: food, space, and your mother's attention, but there's only so much of each to go around. The burrow that seemed spacious when you were the size of a ping pong ball now feels cramped with 3 rapidly growing armadillos squirming around in it. Your claws are starting to develop, tiny curved things that will eventually become your primary tools for survival. Right now, they're mainly useful for gripping your mother when she's feeding you, or for accidentally scratching your siblings when you're all fighting for the best sleeping spot. But you practice using them, scraping at the burrow walls, getting a feel for how they work. One day, your mother doesn't come back when expected. Hours pass, then more hours. You and your siblings huddle together, not sure what to do. The chamber feels different without her presence. Quieter, colder, somehow less safe. You start to understand that your survival depends entirely on her survival, and that's a terrifying realization for a creature that weighs less than a slice of bread. When she finally returns, she's moving differently, more carefully, like she's hurt or exhausted. She settles down to feed you, but you can sense the tension in her body. Something happened up there, something that reminded her just how dangerous the world is. She grooms herself more thoroughly than usual, paying special attention to a spot on her side where the fur looks ruffled. As you grow, your hearing becomes more acute. You start picking up on sounds your mother makes that you hadn't noticed before, the soft scraping of her claws against the tunnel walls when she leaves, the slight change in her breathing when she's alert to danger, the way she moves more quietly when she's trying not to attract attention. These are survival skills you're learning without even realizing it. Your diet is still entirely milk, but your mother has started acting differently during feeding times. She's less patient, more likely to move away if you're not quick enough to latch on. This isn't cruelty, it's preparation. She's slowly teaching you that food isn't guaranteed, that you need to be fast and decisive when opportunities arise. The burrow has become your entire universe, but it's a universe with rules. Stay quiet when your mother tenses up. Move quickly when she's ready to feed. Don't wander toward the tunnel entrance. These aren't rules she's explicitly taught you, but you've absorbed them through observation and instinct. Breaking them feels wrong, even though you don't fully understand why. Your siblings are developing their own personalities. One is more aggressive during feeding, always pushing to get the best position. Another is more cautious, often the last to approach when your mother returns. You fall somewhere in between, learning to read the situation and adapt accordingly. These early dynamics will shape how you interact with other armadillos for the rest of your life. Sometimes, when your mother is gone, you hear sounds from above that make you freeze instinctively. Heavy footsteps, deep breathing, the scrape of claws that are much larger than yours. These are the sounds of predators moving across the surface, and even though you've never seen one, something deep in your genetic memory tells you to be afraid. The chamber is starting to smell different as you and your siblings grow. It's not unpleasant, just more complex. A mixture of your developing scent glands, your mother's musk, and the earthy smell of the burrow itself. This scent cocktail will become as familiar to you as the sound of your own heartbeat. Your mother has started leaving for longer periods, sometimes disappearing for most of the day. When she returns, she often carries the scent of different places, sometimes dry and sandy, sometimes rich with the smell of decomposing vegetation. You're getting your first hints of just how varied the world above ground really is. One evening, she returns with something new, a small insect carcass stuck to her fur. It falls off while she's settling down to feed you, and all three of you siblings stare at it with intense curiosity. It's the first piece of the outside world that's made it into your burrow, and it represents everything you don't yet know about your future diet. Your claws are getting stronger, and you've started unconsciously scraping at the burrow walls during your waking hours. It's partly exploration, partly practice. You're developing the muscle memory you'll need for digging your own tunnels someday, though that day still feels impossibly far away. The soft pink shell that covers your back is gradually becoming more defined. You can feel the individual plates developing, each one fitting precisely against its neighbors, like pieces of a biological puzzle. This armor will be your primary protection against a hostile world, but for now, it's still soft enough that you could probably bite through it if you tried. Your mother's behavior has become more erratic. Some days she's protective and attentive. Other days she seems almost indifferent to your presence. This isn't a sign of neglect. It's part of the gradual process of weaning you from dependence. She's preparing you for independence, whether you realize it or not. The sounds from above ground have become part of the background noise of your existence. You've learned to distinguish between the different types of footsteps, the various bird calls, even the subtle changes in air pressure that indicate weather patterns. These skills will be crucial when you eventually venture to the surface. Your siblings are growing at slightly different rates. One is noticeably larger than the other two, which is starting to create tension during feeding times. Competition for resources is becoming more serious as you all get bigger and hungrier. Your mother has less patience for squabbling, often moving away entirely if the three of you can't sort yourselves out quickly. The burrow that once felt spacious now feels cramped with three growing armadillos and their increasingly irritable mother. Space is becoming a premium, and you've all started unconsciously establishing small territories within the chamber. It's your first lesson in the importance of personal space and resource management. One day, your mother returns from a foraging trip and immediately begins behaving strangely. She moves around the chamber restlessly, occasionally stopping to sniff the air near the tunnel entrance. Her agitation is contagious, and you and your siblings huddle together, sensing danger, even though you can't identify its source. Hours pass before she settles down, but the tension remains. Something has changed in the world above, something that has put her on high alert. You don't know it yet, but this is your introduction to the constant state of vigilance that will define your adult life. In a world full of predators, relaxation is a luxury you can rarely afford. Your diet is about to change dramatically, but you don't know that yet. For now, you're still entirely dependent on your mother's milk, still small enough to fit in a human hand, still innocent of the harsh realities that await you above ground. But that innocence is rapidly coming to an end. Your first glimpse of the surface world comes unexpectedly. Your mother returns from one of her extended hunting trips, but instead of settling down immediately, she does something different. She positions herself near the tunnel entrance and makes a soft clicking sound you've never heard before. It's not threatening, but it's definitely a signal. You and your siblings exchange glances, unsure what she wants. She clicks again, more insistently this time, and starts moving slowly toward the tunnel. The message becomes clear. She wants you to follow. Your siblings hesitate, pressed against the back wall of the chamber, like they're trying to disappear into the soil, but curiosity wins out over caution, and you take the first tentative steps toward the tunnel entrance. The passage is narrow, barely wide enough for your mother to fit through comfortably. For you, It's like walking through a cave. The walls press in on both sides, and the ceiling is so low you have to keep your head down. But as you move forward, something changes. The air feels different, fresher, with strange new scents that make your nose twitch. And ahead, impossibly bright, is something you've never seen before: light. Your first look at the outside world is overwhelming. Everything is huge, bright, and moving. The sky stretches endlessly overhead, a blue expanse so vast it makes you dizzy. Grass towers above you, like a green forest, each blade swaying in the breeze. The sun hits your pink shell and warms it in a way that feels both wonderful and terrifying. Your mother emerges behind you, nudging you gently away from the burrow entrance. She's completely alert now, her head constantly turning, ears twitching at every sound. This is her world, and she navigates it with the confidence of someone who's survived here for years. But for you, every shadow could hide a monster. Every sound could signal danger. The ground beneath your claws feels different from the smooth dirt of the burrow. It's rough and uneven, covered with dried grass, small stones, and things you can't identify. Your claws, which seemed adequate for scraping burrow walls, now feel inadequate for this complex terrain. Each step is uncertain. Each movement requires careful consideration. Your mother starts moving, and you realize this isn't just a sightseeing trip. She's hunting, and you're apparently supposed to watch and learn. She moves with purpose, nose to the ground, following scent trails invisible to you. Occasionally she stops and digs, her powerful claws sending dirt flying. Most of the time she comes up empty, but sometimes she unearths something small and wriggling that disappears into her mouth before you can get a good look at it. Your siblings have finally worked up the courage to emerge from the tunnel. They stay close to the entrance, ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. You understand their caution, but something about this new world fascinates you, despite the obvious dangers. The smells are incredible. Rich, complex layers of scent that tell stories you're only beginning to decode. A shadow passes overhead, and your mother freezes instantly. You've never seen her move so fast. In one fluid motion, she throws herself flat against the ground, pressing her shell down and tucking her head under her body. The message is clear: do the same immediately. You drop to your belly just as a hawk circles overhead, its keen eyes scanning the ground below. The hawk passes without spotting you, but your mother stays motionless for several more minutes. When she finally lifts her head, her movements are even more cautious than before. This is your first lesson in predator avoidance, and it's a harsh one. The sky itself is dangerous here, filled with creatures that consider you an easy meal. Your mother resumes hunting, but now she stays closer to areas with overhead cover, patches of thick grass, the shadow of a large rock, anywhere that might hide you from aerial predators. You're learning that survival isn't just about finding food. It's about finding food without becoming food yourself. She uncovers an ant nest, and suddenly the ground comes alive with insects. Your mother's tongue darts out repeatedly, capturing ants with impressive efficiency. Some escape and run over your claws, giving you your first taste of potential prey. They're tiny, quick, and surprisingly difficult to catch. Your clumsy attempts at tongue darting miss more often than they hit. But when you do manage to catch one, the taste is a revelation. It's nothing like your mother's milk, sharper, more complex, with a slight crunch that's oddly satisfying. This is what you'll be eating for the rest of your life, and your body seems to recognize it instinctively. Your digestive system, which has been preparing for this transition, immediately starts processing the insect protein. The hunting lesson continues as your mother moves methodically through her territory. She shows you how to identify promising digging spots by scent, how to excavate efficiently without wasting energy, and how to stay alert for danger while your head is down. These aren't verbal instructions. She simply demonstrates, expecting you to observe and learn. A rustling in the grass nearby sends all of you into high alert. Your mother positions herself between you and the sound, her body tense and ready. A small lizard emerges, completely oblivious to your presence. It's not a threat, but your mother's reaction teaches you an important lesson. Assume danger first, confirm safety second. Your siblings are having their own learning experiences. One discovers that digging is harder than it looks and ends up with a face full of dirt. The other becomes fixated on a beetle that's far too large and aggressive for a novice hunter. You're all learning through trial and error, with your mother providing guidance through example rather than intervention. As the day progresses, you notice how different the surface world feels compared to your underground home. The temperature fluctuates with the sun's position and cloud cover. The air moves constantly, carrying new scents and sounds from distant places. Everything feels alive and unpredictable in a way that your burrow never did. Your mother begins showing signs of fatigue, but she doesn't head home immediately. Instead, she leads you to a different area where the soil looks softer and more promising. She demonstrates a new digging technique, short, efficient bursts rather than the deep excavations you watched earlier. This is apparently how you hunt when you need to conserve energy. A distant sound makes her lift her head sharply. It's barely audible to you, but she clearly recognizes it as significant. Without warning, she herds you quickly toward a dense patch of grass. You're learning that danger can come from any direction at any time, and your survival depends on recognizing and responding to threats you might not even perceive yet. The grass provides temporary cover, but your mother doesn't relax. She's constantly scanning, constantly listening. You realize that this state of hypervigilance is normal for her, not exceptional. This is what it means to be a pink fairy armadillo in a world full of predators. You're never truly safe, only temporarily undetected. Your first surface expedition is coming to an end. Your mother starts moving back toward the burrow entrance, but she takes an indirect route, zigzagging through available cover. Even the journey home is a lesson in avoiding detection. Every movement is calculated, every pause strategic. Back at the burrow entrance, she pauses and sniffs the air carefully before allowing you to descend. Even your own home isn't safe unless she confirms it. You file away this lesson along with all the others. Never assume, always verify, constantly evaluate threats. The return to the familiar darkness of the burrow feels both comforting and confining after your surface adventure. The chamber that once seemed adequate now feels almost claustrophobic after experiencing the vast openness above, but it's still home, still the safest place you know. Your mother settles down, clearly exhausted from the hunting expedition and the constant vigilance required to keep you safe. You and your siblings cluster around her, but feeding time feels different now. You're no longer entirely dependent on her milk. You've tasted the food you'll be eating as an adult, and your body is already starting to adapt. The surface world has left its mark on all of you. Your shells are dusty, your claws are dirty, and your minds are full of new information to process. You've seen the sky, felt the wind, tasted your first insects, and learned that survival requires constant awareness. It's overwhelming and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Your siblings seem as affected by the experience as you are. There's a new restlessness in the burrow, a sense that this underground chamber is no longer your entire world, but just a temporary refuge. The surface calls to you now, promising food and adventure and 1,000 new experiences. But it also promises death in 100 different forms, and your mother's vigilance has made that abundantly clear. The price of freedom is constant fear, and you're just beginning to understand what that means for your future. Sleep comes eventually, but it's different now. Your dreams are filled with images of endless sky, swaying grass, and shadows that might hide predators. You're no longer an innocent creature protected by ignorance. You're a pink, fairy armadillo who has seen the world you'll have to navigate alone someday. That someday is coming faster than you realize. Your mother's hunting expeditions become more frequent, and each time she expects you to follow. The surface world, which once seemed impossibly vast and dangerous, starts becoming familiar territory. You learn to recognize the subtle differences between safe digging spots and areas where predators might be lurking. The soil texture tells you stories now. Loose sand means easier excavation, but also means your tunnels might collapse, while packed earth offers stability, but requires more energy to penetrate. Your siblings are developing distinct hunting styles. One has become obsessed with beetle larvae, spending excessive amounts of time digging deep holes in pursuit of these protein-rich prizes. The other prefers surface hunting, picking off ants and small insects without much excavation. You fall somewhere between these approaches, adapting your technique based on what the terrain offers. The competition between you and your siblings is intensifying. Food sources that once seemed abundant now feel limited when 3 growing armadillos are competing for them. Your mother no longer intervenes when disputes arise over particularly rich feeding areas. She watches from a distance, letting you sort out territorial disagreements through a combination of pushing, chittering, and strategic positioning. Your shell is hardening noticeably. What started as soft, flexible armor is becoming genuine protection. You can feel the individual plates solidifying, creating overlapping layers that deflect thorns and small impacts. The pink color remains vibrant, but the surface is becoming smoother and more resilient. You've started testing its effectiveness by deliberately brushing against rough surfaces, gauging how much protection provides. The burr actually row feels increasingly cramped with 3 rapidly growing occupants and an increasingly irritable mother. Personal space has become a precious commodity, and you've all started establishing subtle, territorial boundaries within the chamber. Your mother spends less time in the burrow now, often sleeping near the entrance, where she can respond quickly to surface threats. Your first major scare comes without warning. You're following your mother through a particularly promising patch of soft soil when a domestic dog appears seemingly from nowhere. It's not hunting, just wandering through the area, but your mother's reaction is immediate and terrifying. She throws herself flat against the ground and makes a sound you've never heard before, a sharp hiss that freezes your blood. You drop instantly, pressing your shell against the earth and tucking your head under your body. The dog passes within feet of your location, its massive paws thundering against the ground. Each footstep feels like an earthquake. The animal's scent is overwhelming, a mixture of domestic comfort and predatory potential that confuses your instincts. Okay, it could kill you without even trying, simply by stepping on you accidentally. The dog moves on, distracted by something more interesting, but your mother doesn't move for another 20 minutes. When she finally lifts her head, her entire body is trembling with residual fear. This is your introduction to the reality that threats come in many forms, and size isn't always related to intent. That dog wasn't hunting you, but it could have ended your life through sheer carelessness. Your hunting skills are improving rapidly. You've learned to identify the subtle surface signs that indicate insect activity below ground. A slight depression in the soil might mark an ant tunnel. Disturbed earth could signal beetle larvae. Even the pattern of grass growth can tell you where the richest feeding opportunities lie hidden. Your tongue has become a precision instrument. The clumsy attempts at catching ants during your first surface expedition have evolved into efficient strikes that rarely miss their targets. You've developed a feel for the timing, when to strike, how far to extend, how quickly to retract. It's becoming second nature, like breathing. But success brings new challenges. The more efficient you become at hunting, the more you come into conflict with your siblings over territory. The area around your burrow can only support so much hunting activity before the insect populations become depleted. Your mother has started leading you to more distant locations, expanding your knowledge of the surrounding terrain while also spreading out the hunting pressure. These longer expeditions are revealing the true extent of your mother's territory. What you initially thought was just the area immediately around your burrow is actually a carefully maintained hunting ground that extends in all directions. Your mother has established multiple feeding sites, each one optimized for different types of prey and different seasonal conditions. You're learning to read the landscape like a map. That rocky outcropping provides good cover from aerial predators, but poor hunting opportunities. The low-lying area near the seasonal creek offers rich soil and abundant insects, but floods during heavy rains. Each location has advantages and disadvantages that must be weighed against current conditions and threat levels. Your mother's teaching methods are becoming more demanding. She no longer waits for you to catch up if you fall behind during hunting expeditions. She no longer shares her catches if you fail to find your own food. The message is clear. Independence is approaching whether you're ready for it or not. The safety net of maternal protection is being withdrawn gradually, but deliberately. Your siblings are responding to this increased pressure differently. The beetle-obsessed one has become even more specialized, developing impressive excavation skills, but struggling with surface hunting. The surface hunter has become incredibly efficient at catching small, fast-moving prey, but lacks the strength for serious digging. You're maintaining your generalist approach, but you wonder if specialization might be more effective. A new sound enters your world, the distant rumble of machinery. Farm equipment operating somewhere beyond your current territory creates vibrations that travel through the ground and reach your sensitive hearing. Your mother's reaction to these sounds teaches you that human activity, even when distant, represents a potential threat that must be monitored and avoided. The weather is changing, and with it comes new challenges. Cooler temperatures mean different insect activity patterns. Some of your reliable food sources have become less productive, while others have emerged in unexpected locations. Your mother is adapting her hunting routes accordingly, and you're learning that survival requires constant adjustment to changing conditions. Your first encounter with another adult armadillo besides your mother is brief but educational. A stranger appears at the edge of your mother's territory, clearly looking for food sources. Your mother's response is immediate and aggressive. She positions herself between the intruder and her offspring, making threatening gestures that leave no doubt about her intentions. The confrontation is resolved without violence, but only because the stranger chooses to retreat. You realize that your mother's territory isn't just a hunting ground. It's a defended resource that she's willing to fight for. The boundaries aren't marked with physical barriers, but they're clearly understood by other armadillos who respect the established territorial claims. Your burrow has become a launching point, rather than a permanent home. You and your siblings spend increasing amounts of time on the surface, returning underground mainly to sleep and escape the worst weather. The chamber that once contained your entire world now feels like just another hiding place, useful but not essential. Your mother has started disappearing for entire days, leaving you and your siblings to fend for yourselves. The first time this happens, it's terrifying. You huddle together in the burrow, not sure whether to venture out alone or wait for her return. Hunger eventually drives you to the surface, where you discover that you're capable of finding food without her guidance. These solo hunting expeditions reveal gaps in your knowledge that your mother's presence had previously masked. You make mistakes, choosing poor digging locations, failing to notice obvious signs of danger, exhausting yourself with inefficient techniques. But you also make discoveries, finding food sources and safe routes that your mother hadn't shown you. Your siblings are having their own learning experiences during these unsupervised periods. The beetle specialist has discovered a rich larval bed that provides days of excellent hunting. The surface hunter has perfected a technique for raiding ant trails that yields impressive results. You're all developing individual expertise that will serve you well when full independence arrives. The territorial boundaries that once seemed fixed are starting to blur. With your mother absent for extended periods, you and your siblings are exploring areas that were previously off limits. Some of these expeditions reveal excellent hunting opportunities. Others bring you dangerously close to the territories of other armadillo families, creating potential for conflict. Your first territorial dispute with a non-family member is over a particularly rich patch of beetle larvae. A young armadillo from a neighboring territory has been hunting in what you consider your family's area. The confrontation is mostly posturing, chittering, shell displays, and aggressive positioning, but it establishes precedents for future interactions. You win this particular dispute mainly through persistence rather than superior fighting ability. Your opponent eventually gives up and moves on to less contested areas, but the victory comes with a cost. You've revealed your hunting locations to a competitor who might return when you're not present to defend them. Your mother's absences are becoming longer and more frequent. When she does return, she's often exhausted and shows less interest in your activities. She still provides some guidance, but it's clear that her primary responsibility now is maintaining her own survival rather than actively teaching you. The transition from dependence to independence is accelerating. Your shell has reached nearly adult hardness, providing genuine protection against most threats you're likely to encounter. You've tested it against thorns, sharp rocks, and even the claws of aggressive insects. The armor isn't perfect, but it's effective enough to give you confidence in situations that would have been terrifying just weeks ago. The pink coloration that gives your species its name is becoming more pronounced as blood flow to the shell increases with your growing size. You're developing the distinctive appearance that will define you as an adult, small, armored, and unmistakably pink. But appearance is less important than capability, and your capabilities are expanding rapidly. Your hunting territory has grown to encompass areas that once seemed impossibly distant from your birth burrow. You know the locations of seasonal water sources, temporary shelter sites, and the richest feeding areas within a considerable radius. This knowledge represents the foundation of your future survival as an independent adult. Your siblings' specializations are becoming more pronounced. The digger has developed massive shoulder muscles and claws that can penetrate soil types that challenge even adult armadillos. The surface hunter has become incredibly fast and agile, capable of catching prey that other armadillos couldn't even attempt. Your generalist approach seems less impressive by comparison, but it offers versatility that specialization lacks. The seasonal changes are accelerating, and with them comes the pressure to establish your own territory before the optimal hunting season ends. Your mother's territory can't support 4 adult armadillos indefinitely. The time is approaching when you'll need to strike out on your own, leaving behind the only home you've ever known to carve out your own place in this dangerous world. The thought is both exciting and terrifying. You've learned the skills necessary for survival, but applying them without the safety net of your mother's experience and established territory will be the ultimate test. Everything you've learned so far has been preparation for this moment, when you'll transform from a protected juvenile into a fully independent pink fairy armadillo fighting for survival in a world that offers no guarantees. That moment arrives sooner than expected. Your mother returns from one of her extended hunting trips, but this time something is fundamentally different. She doesn't settle into her usual resting spot. Instead, she moves restlessly around the burrow, occasionally stopping to look at each of you with an expression you can't quite read. There's no aggression, but there's also no warmth. It's the look of someone making calculations. She begins systematically destroying the comfort items in the burrow, the soft grass bedding she once maintained, the carefully arranged dirt mounds that served as sleeping areas. Her claws scrape against the walls, removing scent markers that identified this as a family home. The message becomes clear even before she acts on it. This is no longer your sanctuary. Without warning, she turns toward you specifically, not your siblings, you. Her body language shifts to something you've never seen before, a combination of threat and dismissal that makes your shell instinctively tighten. She advances, not to attack, but to communicate something far more final. You're being evicted, not tomorrow, not when you're more prepared, now. Your siblings watch from the far wall as your mother herds you toward the tunnel entrance. There's no ceremony, no gradual transition. She's decided that you're ready for independence, and her decision is final. You look back once at the chamber that housed your entire early existence, but she blocks your view with her body. The past is over. Only the future remains. The surface world feels different when you emerge alone. Every shadow seems deeper, every sound more ominous. Your mother follows you up, but only to ensure you actually leave. She positions herself between you and the burrow entrance, making it clear that return isn't an option. This territory belongs to her and your remaining siblings now. You're officially homeless. Your first impulse is to dig a new burrow immediately, somewhere close enough that you can still see familiar landmarks. But the soil near your birth territory is already claimed. Every promising location bears the scent markers of established residents who won't hesitate to defend their boundaries. You quickly learn that proximity to your childhood home isn't just unavailable, it's dangerous. You spend your first night alone, huddled under a clump of thick grass, too exposed for comfort but with no alternative. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by every unfamiliar sound. A distant owl call sends your heart racing. The rustle of small mammals moving through the vegetation nearby keeps you frozen in terror for hours. By morning, you're exhausted and desperately hungry. Hunting alone proves more challenging than you anticipated. Without your mother's guidance, you make rookie mistakes that waste precious energy. You dig in locations that yield nothing, chase insects that are too fast to catch, and spend far too much time in exposed areas where predators might spot you. Your first day of independence produces barely enough food to sustain your basic metabolic needs. The search for suitable territory becomes your obsession. You need soil that's soft enough for digging, but stable enough for permanent burrows. You need abundant insect populations, but also adequate cover from aerial predators. You need water access, but not so close to streams that flooding becomes a risk. Finding all these requirements in unclaimed territory proves nearly impossible. Your first territorial challenge comes from an unexpected source, another recently dispersed juvenile like yourself. You encounter each other while investigating the same promising patch of sandy soil, and neither of you is willing to back down. The confrontation escalates from chittering to actual physical contact, your shells clicking together as you try to establish dominance. The fight is clumsy and exhausting. Neither of you has experience with serious conflict, so it becomes a test of endurance rather than skill. You grapple and push, trying to force your opponent to retreat without causing serious injury. Eventually, pure stubbornness wins out. Your opponent gives up and moves on, leaving you in possession of your first claimed territory. Victory feels hollow when you realize why the area was unclaimed. The soil composition is perfect for digging, but it's located in a natural depression that collects water during even light rainfall. Your first burrow floods within days of completion, forcing you to abandon hours of exhausting excavation work. You're learning that some territories are unclaimed for very good reasons. Your second attempt at establishing territory brings you into conflict with an established adult. The confrontation is brief and decisive. You're outmatched in every way that matters: size, experience, confidence, territorial knowledge. The adult armadillo possesses advantages you can't overcome through determination alone. You retreat quickly, but not before learning valuable lessons about reading territorial boundaries and assessing opponents. Weeks pass in a cycle of searching, digging, competing, and relocating. Your body is adapting to the constant stress and physical demands of independence. Your muscles are becoming more defined, your claws more efficient, your reflexes sharper. But the psychological toll is significant. The security you once took for granted has been replaced by constant uncertainty. Food becomes an obsession that dominates every waking moment. You develop an intimate knowledge of insect behavior patterns, seasonal migrations, and optimal hunting times. Your tongue strikes become more accurate, your excavation techniques more efficient, but you're always operating on the edge of adequate nutrition, never quite achieving the surplus that would allow for true comfort. Your first successful burrow construction feels like a major victory. After countless false starts and territorial disputes, you finally locate an unclaimed area with suitable soil composition and adequate resources. The digging takes 3 exhausting days, but the result is a genuine shelter, narrow entrance tunnel, expanded chamber, proper drainage. It's not elaborate, but it's yours. The celebration is short-lived. Within a week, you discover why this particular area remained unclaimed for so long. It's directly beneath a frequently used cattle path. The constant vibrations from heavy hooves make the burrow walls unstable, and the risk of collapse is constant. Worse, the cattle traffic creates a scent trail that attracts predators who follow the livestock, looking for easy opportunities. Your third burrow attempt succeeds partially. The location is stable and relatively safe, but the soil composition makes excavation extremely difficult. What should have been a day's work stretches into a week of gradual progress. Your claws become worn and painful from scraping against the hard-packed earth, but the finished product is sturdy enough to withstand weather and time. Competition for food in your new territory is fierce. You're not the only armadillo who discovered this area's potential, and the local insect populations can't support multiple residents indefinitely. You develop increasingly sophisticated hunting strategies, timing your activity to avoid competitors, exploiting food sources that others overlook, establishing feeding territories within your larger home range. Your first winter alone tests every survival skill you've acquired. Insect activity drops dramatically as temperatures fall, forcing you to expand your diet to include larvae, pupae, and other less active food sources. Your burrow becomes a critical refuge from cold weather that could kill you if you remained exposed. You spend days at a time underground, emerging only when hunger becomes unbearable. The isolation affects you more than you anticipated. Armadillos aren't social creatures, but the complete absence of familiar sounds and scents creates a psychological emptiness that surprises you with its intensity. You find yourself returning to locations near your birth territory. It's not to reclaim old ground, but simply to experience the comfort of familiar landmarks. Your encounters with other armadillos become rare, but significant events. Most interactions are territorial disputes or brief meetings at shared resources like water sources. But occasionally, you encounter another armadillo whose scent carries the possibility of something beyond competition. These meetings are awkward and tentative. Neither of you has experience with social interaction beyond family relationships. Your shell reaches full adult hardness during your first year of independence. The armor that once felt like a burden now provides genuine confidence in dangerous situations. You've tested its effectiveness against real threats, dodging the strike of a snake, surviving a glancing blow from a hawk's talon, emerging unscathed from a tumble down a rocky slope that would have been fatal without protection. Your territory gradually expands as you identify and claim additional resources. What started as a single burrow becomes a network of shelters connected by well-traveled paths that you know intimately. Each route offers multiple escape options. Each shelter provides specific advantages for different weather conditions or threat levels. You're becoming a true territorial resident rather than a desperate refugee. The anniversary of your eviction passes without fanfare, but you mark it internally. A full year of independence has transformed you from a dependent juvenile into a capable adult. Your survival skills are proven, your territory is established, your future is entirely in your own hands. The terrified creature who was forced from its birth burrow no longer exists, replaced by someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more self-reliant. Your first encounter with a potential mate occurs during your second spring of independence. The meeting is complicated by territorial concerns. She's hunting in an area you consider part of your range, but her scent carries information that overrides competitive instincts. The interaction is brief and awkward, neither of you entirely sure how to proceed beyond basic territorial negotiations. But something has changed in your psychological makeup. The complete focus on individual survival that dominated your first year is beginning to shift toward broader considerations. You find yourself maintaining your territory with greater care, not just for immediate survival needs, but with an eye toward long-term suitability. The possibility of supporting offspring someday influences decisions that once were purely selfish. Your hunting efficiency has improved to the point where you can afford to be selective about food sources. You no longer consume everything edible you encounter. Instead, you target high-quality prey that provides maximum nutrition for minimum energy expenditure. This efficiency creates small surpluses of time and energy that you can invest in territory improvement and exploration. The world that once seemed impossibly vast and dangerous has become a known quantity. You understand the seasonal patterns, the territorial boundaries of your neighbors, the locations of reliable resources and potential threats. What was once terra incognita has been mapped, explored, and categorized. You've achieved something that seemed impossible during those first terrifying weeks of independence. You've created a home. Your mother's territory feels simultaneously familiar and foreign when you occasionally pass through its outer boundaries. The scent markers have changed, indicating new residents and altered territorial claims. You wonder about your siblings, whether they've achieved their own independence, found their own territories, survived their own challenges. But these are idle thoughts. Your world has moved beyond family connections to individual achievement. The pink coloration that defines your species has deepened with maturity. Your shell now displays the rich, vibrant hue that will identify you for the rest of your life. Combined with your compact size and distinctive armor, you've achieved the appearance that makes pink fairy armadillos unmistakable among the world's armadillo species. You're no longer becoming something. You are something, fully realized and complete. Your burrow network has evolved into a sophisticated system that rivals anything your mother maintained. Multiple entrances and exits provide escape routes from various threats. Chambers of different sizes serve specific purposes: sleeping, food storage, weather shelter. Connecting tunnels follow routes that minimize energy expenditure while maximizing access to resources. But success brings new vulnerabilities. Your established territory makes you predictable to potential threats who learn your patterns. Your improved nutrition makes you a more attractive target for predators who prefer healthy prey. Your growing confidence sometimes leads to calculated risks that push the boundaries of safety. Survival isn't just about acquiring skills, it's about knowing when not to use them. The cycle is preparing to begin again. Your territory is stable. Your survival skills are proven. Your body has reached full maturity. The next phase of your existence will involve decisions and challenges that make independence seem simple by comparison. Finding a mate, establishing a family territory, raising offspring in a world that offers no guarantees. These are the tests that separate successful armadillos from those who merely survive. But those challenges belong to the future. For now, you are a pink fairy armadillo who has achieved the impossible. You've carved out a place in a hostile world through determination, adaptation, and sheer bloody-minded persistence. Your territory is yours, your burrow is secure, and your next meal is already located and planned. You've beaten the odds that claimed so many others, and you've done it entirely on your own terms. The sun is setting over the pampas, painting the grassland in shades of gold and amber. You emerge from your burrow for evening hunting, your movements confident and purposeful. This is your world now, earned through struggle and maintained through constant vigilance. You are no longer the helpless creature born in a dark chamber months ago. You are a survivor, a territorial holder, a fully realized pink fairy armadillo ready for whatever comes next. The evening hunting routine that once required careful planning now flows automatically. Your movements through the territory follow established patterns. Check the ant colonies near the rocky outcrop. Investigate the soft soil depression where beetle larvae concentrate. Patrol the boundary markers to ensure no competitors have encroached during the day. It's methodical work, but efficiency born from months of trial and error. Your tongue has become a precision instrument capable of extracting insects from crevices that once seemed inaccessible. The awkward attempts at catching ants during your first surface expeditions have evolved into strikes that rarely miss their intended targets. You can gauge distance, its timing, and trajectory with an accuracy that would have seemed impossible during those fumbling early days of independence. But tonight something feels different. A scent drifts across your territory that doesn't belong to any of the usual residents. It's not threatening, no predator markers, no territorial challenge, but it's distinctly armadillo and distinctly unfamiliar. You pause your hunting routine to investigate, following the scent trail with growing curiosity rather than alarm. The trail leads toward the eastern boundary of your territory, an area you don't visit frequently because the hunting is mediocre and the soil composition makes digging difficult. But someone has been there recently, someone who left traces of their presence in disturbed earth and faint scent markings, not territorial claims, more like exploratory scratches of a passing traveler. You find her near a seasonal water source that forms during the rainy months but remains dry most of the year. She's smaller than you, with shell plates that catch the fading sunlight in ways that make the pink coloration seem almost luminescent. Her movements are careful but not fearful, suggesting experience without desperation. She's not a refugee seeking territory. She's something else entirely. Your approach is cautious, instincts warring between territorial defense and something you can't quite identify. She notices you immediately, but doesn't flee or assume defensive postures. Instead, she continues her methodical exploration of the area, occasionally glancing in your direction without apparent concern. Her confidence is both attractive and puzzling. The initial standoff stretches for several minutes, neither of you quite sure how to proceed. Territorial disputes have clear protocols, threat displays, posturing, eventual resolution through dominance or retreat. But this situation doesn't fit established patterns. She's not challenging your territory, you're not defending resources, and yet the encounter feels significant in ways that transcend simple boundary negotiations. She breaks the impasse by returning to her exploration, effectively ignoring your presence while remaining clearly aware of it. The message is sophisticated. She acknowledges your territorial rights while asserting her own autonomy. It's a level of social complexity you haven't encountered since leaving your birth family, and you find yourself intrigued rather than threatened. Your own behavior begins shifting in response to her presence. The efficient hunting patterns you've developed give way to something more elaborate, unnecessary displays of excavation skill, demonstration hunts in areas where success is guaranteed, territorial maintenance activities that happen to occur within her line of sight. You're showing off, though you don't consciously recognize the behavior. She responds to your displays with subtle acknowledgments, a pause in her activities when you successfully extract a particularly large beetle, a slight adjustment in position that suggests approval of your territorial boundaries. The communication is wordless but unmistakable. You're negotiating something that goes far beyond simple coexistence. The encounter extends well beyond normal territorial interaction timeframes. Hours pass as you both continue your respective activities while maintaining awareness of each other's presence. The usual urgency of hunting and territory maintenance fades into something more relaxed, almost leisurely. You're both accomplished enough at survival that efficiency can occasionally give way to other considerations. As full darkness approaches, practical concerns reassert themselves. She begins moving toward the territory boundaries, not fleeing, but completing whatever mission brought her to this area. You don't follow. Territorial instincts still operate, even when complicated by other factors. But you track her movements until her scent fades beyond reliable detection range. Your return to normal hunting activities feels hollow after the complexity of the evening's encounter. The familiar routine of insect extraction and territory patrol continues, but your attention keeps drifting to the areas where her scent lingers. Something has changed in your psychological landscape, though you lack the vocabulary to identify exactly what. Sleep comes fitfully that night. Your burrow, which has provided comfort and security for months, now feels somehow incomplete. The solitude that once represented hard-won independence now carries undertones of isolation that you hadn't previously noticed. Your dreams are filled with fragments of pink shells catching starlight and the memory of another presence that made familiar territory feel new again. Morning brings a return to practical concerns, but the encounter has left lasting effects on your behavior patterns. You find yourself maintaining your territory with greater attention to aesthetic details that serve no survival function. Shell grooming becomes more thorough, scent marking more deliberate. You're preparing for something without consciously acknowledging what that something might be. Your hunting routes begin incorporating areas you hadn't previously explored, territories beyond your established boundaries that might offer encounters similar to the previous evening. These expeditions are risky. They expose you to unfamiliar threats and potential territorial conflicts, but the compulsion to explore overrides purely rational survival calculations. Days pass without another encounter, but the anticipation remains. Your awareness of scent trails becomes more acute, your attention to territorial boundary activities more focused. You're monitoring your environment for signs of her return while maintaining the facade of normal territorial behavior. The duality is exhausting, but somehow necessary. When she does return, it's to a different area entirely, the western edge of your territory, where a small creek provides reliable water during dry seasons. Her approach is more direct this time, less exploratory and more purposeful. She's not investigating unknown territory now. She's revisiting known ground with specific intentions. The second encounter builds on protocols established during the first: mutual acknowledgement, respectful distance, parallel activities that demonstrate competence without direct competition. But there's an added element of familiarity that makes the interaction feel less tentative, more like a continuation of interrupted business rather than a new negotiation. Your displays of territorial prowess become more elaborate and specific. You demonstrate knowledge of seasonal water sources, reveal hidden food caches, showcase the architectural sophistication of your burrow network. These aren't casual demonstrations. They're detailed presentations of your qualifications as a territorial holder and potential partner. Her responses indicate evaluation rather than simple observation. She investigates your territorial markers with the attention of someone assessing quality and sustainability. Her exploration of your hunting grounds suggests genuine interest in their long-term potential. You're being auditioned, and the realization is both flattering and terrifying. The courtship, for that's what this clearly is, though you lack experience to recognize it immediately, extends across multiple encounters over several weeks. Each meeting builds on previous interactions, establishing deeper familiarity and more complex communication patterns. You learn her movement preferences, her hunting specializations, her territorial requirements. She favors areas with loose, sandy soil that allows for rapid excavation but requires frequent burrow maintenance. Her hunting focuses on surface insects rather than deep excavation, suggesting speed and agility over raw digging power. Her territorial needs emphasize secure sleeping areas over extensive hunting grounds, indicating efficiency in resource utilization. Your own territorial improvements begin reflecting consideration of her preferences. You expand excavation activities in sandy areas, develop surface hunting techniques to supplement your deep digging expertise, create additional secure shelters that could accommodate dual occupancy. The changes serve immediate survival needs while preparing for possibilities you're only beginning to contemplate. The decision point arrives without ceremony or obvious triggers. During one of your regular encounters, She approaches closer than previous meetings allowed, entering what would normally be considered threatening proximity. But there's no aggression in her posture, no territorial challenge in her behavior. She's testing boundaries of a different sort entirely. Your response is instinctive and immediate. Instead of defensive posturing, you engage in mutual grooming, the first physical contact between you beyond accidental brushes during parallel activities. Her shell feels different from your own, slightly smoother, with plate configurations that complement rather than duplicate your own protective features. The grooming extends beyond practical parasite removal to become something approaching intimacy. You clean areas she cannot reach herself. She reciprocates with attention to your own inaccessible spots. The activity serves survival functions while establishing trust and physical familiarity that transcends purely territorial relationships. Your territories begin merging through gradual expansion rather than dramatic takeover. Boundary markers shift to accommodate dual occupancy. Hunting schedules coordinate to minimize competition while maximizing resource exploitation. The process takes weeks to complete, but the result is a combined territory that offers advantages neither of you could achieve alone. Mate selection among pink fairy armadillos isn't based on elaborate displays or complex social hierarchies. It's fundamentally practical, an assessment of territorial quality, survival competence, and compatibility of resource requirements. Romance, if it exists at all, manifests through efficient cooperation and mutual territorial enhancement rather than emotional demonstrations. Your first mating occurs during a routine evening hunt, prompted more by seasonal hormonal changes than conscious decision-making. The physical act is brief and businesslike, lacking the drama that characterizes many species' reproductive behaviors. But the aftermath brings changes that extend far beyond simple biological function. Your territorial behavior shifts from individual maintenance to cooperative management. Hunting becomes a coordinated activity that maximizes efficiency while minimizing competition. Burrow construction expands to accommodate dual occupancy and eventual offspring. Resource management transforms from personal survival to household economics. The pregnancy isn't immediately obvious. Her behavior changes are subtle and could be attributed to seasonal variations or territorial adjustments. But your own instincts begin responding to chemical signals you don't consciously detect. Your hunting becomes more aggressive, your territorial defense more vigilant, your burrow maintenance more thorough. When she begins showing obvious signs of pregnancy, your protective instincts intensify dramatically. The territory that once seemed adequately defended now feels vulnerable to threats you hadn't previously considered. Every unusual sound triggers investigation. Every unfamiliar scent demands immediate attention. You're preparing for responsibilities that extend beyond personal survival. Her hunting activities decrease as pregnancy progresses, placing additional pressure on your ability to provide adequate nutrition for both of you. Your foraging range expands beyond previous boundaries, sometimes bringing you into conflict with neighboring territorial holders who object to your encroachment. The disputes are usually resolved through negotiation rather than violence, but they add stress to an already demanding situation. The burrow requires extensive modification to accommodate pregnancy and eventual offspring. New chambers must be excavated, existing tunnels widened, drainage systems improved to prevent flooding during vulnerable periods. The construction work is exhausting, but it provides tangible preparation for changes that still seem abstract, despite their obvious inevitability. Your mate's behavior becomes increasingly focused on burrow preparation as her due date approaches. She spends hours arranging and rearranging bedding materials, testing air circulation patterns, ensuring optimal temperature regulation. Her attention to detail exceeds anything you would have considered necessary, but you defer to her expertise in matters beyond your experience. The birth itself occurs with little drama. She simply disappears into the deepest burrow chamber one evening and emerges hours later with the scent of new life clinging to her shell. You're not permitted to investigate immediately. Her protective instincts create a temporary exclusion zone around the nesting area that you respect, despite burning curiosity about your offspring. Your first glimpse of your children comes days later when she finally allows you near the nesting chamber. They're impossibly small, pink, and helpless, carbon copies of your earliest existence, compressed into creatures that could fit in your palm. 3 of them, huddled together in a nest of carefully prepared soft materials, completely dependent on their mother's warmth and nutrition. The reality of parenthood hits like a physical blow. These tiny creatures represent the future of your genetic line, but they're also enormous vulnerabilities that must be protected at all costs. Every predator in the area represents a threat to your offspring. Every territorial boundary becomes a defensive position that cannot be compromised. Your hunting activities intensify beyond anything you've previously experienced. 2 adults and 3 growing offspring require resources that strain your territorial capacity to its limits. You begin exploiting marginal food sources, investigating areas you've previously avoided, taking risks that would have seemed irrational during your bachelor existence. The sleep deprivation is crushing. Infant armadillos require frequent feeding, and your mate's increased nutritional needs demand constant foraging support. You catch rest in fragments between hunting expeditions, never achieving the deep sleep that once restored your energy. Your performance suffers, but the demands are non-negotiable. Your territorial defense becomes paranoid in intensity. Sounds that once merited casual investigation now trigger immediate and aggressive response. Scent trails that previously rated routine monitoring become potential invasion routes requiring constant surveillance. The relaxed confidence of successful territorial establishment gives way to hypervigilant protection of increasingly precious resources. The offspring grow with startling rapidity, their demands escalating daily as they develop from helpless bundles into active, curious juveniles. Their appetites increase geometrically, their space requirements expand constantly, their safety needs become more complex as they begin exploring beyond the immediate nest area. You're learning that successful reproduction is far more demanding than mere survival. Your mate's recovery from birth is complicated by the constant demands of nursing and childcare. She needs additional nutrition to support milk production, extra rest to recover from pregnancy, and enhanced security to protect herself and the offspring during vulnerable periods. Your role expands from hunting provider to comprehensive support system. The first time you see your offspring emerge from the burrow is a moment of pride mixed with terror. They're still small enough that almost any predator could kill them easily, but they're also displaying the curiosity and intelligence that will eventually enable their own survival. They investigate their environment with the same methodical attention to detail that characterizes adult armadillo behavior. Teaching them hunting techniques proves more challenging than you anticipated. They lack the patience for extended stalking, the precision for accurate strikes, the strength for effective excavation, but they demonstrate remarkable learning ability, copying your techniques with increasing accuracy as their physical capabilities develop. Progress is slow but measurable. Your territorial boundaries require constant maintenance now that they protect a family rather than just a pair. Neighboring armadillos probe for weakness, testing whether your increased responsibilities have created opportunities for territorial expansion. Most challenges are resolved through demonstration rather than actual conflict, but the pressure is constant and exhausting. The seasonal transition brings new challenges as insect populations shift and weather patterns affect hunting efficiency. Resources that seemed adequate for 2 adults prove marginal when supporting 3 rapidly growing juveniles. You begin considering territorial expansion options that would have seemed unnecessary during your bachelor existence. Your first serious territorial conflict since becoming a parent erupts over access to a rich beetle larval bed that spans the boundary between your territory and a neighbor's claim. The dispute escalates beyond normal negotiation when your opponent realizes that your increased responsibilities might limit your ability to defend contested areas effectively. The fight is brutal but brief. Your opponent has underestimated the intensity of parental protective instincts, assuming that family responsibilities would make you more cautious rather than more aggressive. The miscalculation costs him significant territory and establishes your reputation as a formidable defender despite your increased obligations. Victory in the territorial dispute expands your resource base significantly, easing the pressure of feeding a growing family. But it also establishes precedents that attract attention from other neighbors who wonder whether your success indicates vulnerability or strength. You realize that parenthood has made you both more dangerous and more endangered. Your offspring begin displaying individual personalities that will shape their eventual survival strategies. One favors deep excavation techniques, despite limited strength, showing persistence that compensates for physical limitations. Another prefers surface hunting, developing speed and agility that complement natural curiosity. The third displays balanced capabilities, but exceptional caution that suggests strong survival instincts. The burrow system requires constant expansion as the family grows and territorial pressures intensify. New chambers accommodate growing offspring. Additional escape routes provide security options. Expanded storage areas house surplus resources against seasonal shortages. Construction never ends. It simply shifts focus as needs evolve. Your mate begins showing signs of readiness for another reproductive cycle, her behavior shifting toward the territorial assessment and mate evaluation that preceded your first successful breeding. The prospect of additional offspring both excites and terrifies you. More genetic success balanced against exponentially increased resource requirements and security challenges. The decision to breed again isn't really a decision at all. Seasonal hormones and territorial success combine to make reproduction feel inevitable rather than optional. Your current offspring are approaching independence. Your territory can theoretically support additional family members, and your proven success as parents suggests good prospects for raising another generation. But the world has become more dangerous since your first breeding season. Predator populations have increased, territorial competition has intensified, and environmental changes have affected food availability in ways that make family survival more challenging. Success is no longer just about competence. It increasingly depends on luck, timing, and factors beyond your control. Your current offspring are beginning to show signs of approaching independence. Their hunting skills have improved dramatically, their territorial awareness has sharpened, and their physical capabilities now approach adult levels. Soon, they'll be ready for dispersal, freeing up resources for new arrivals while creating emotional challenges you're not prepared to face. The cycle is preparing to repeat itself, but you're no longer the naive juvenile who stumbled into parenthood through instinct and luck. You're an experienced territorial holder with proven reproductive success, established resource bases, and hard-won survival expertise. Your next offspring will benefit from everything you've learned, but they'll also face challenges that didn't exist when you were learning to survive. The sun sets over your expanded territory as you emerge for evening hunting, your movements now incorporating patrol routes that encompass multiple burrow systems and feeding areas optimized for family rather than individual survival. Your offspring follow at a respectful distance, still learning but increasingly capable of independent operation. This is your world now, not just the territory you claimed as a desperate juvenile, but the complex ecosystem of family, resources, and responsibilities that defines adult armadillo existence. You've succeeded beyond the simple survival that once seemed impossible, creating something that extends beyond individual achievement to encompass genetic legacy and territorial establishment. But the story isn't finished. Your current offspring will soon face their own dispersal challenges. Your territory will require constant defense against new competitors, and your own aging body will eventually face the same mortality that claims every pink fairy armadillo, regardless of their success during peak years. The next chapter is already beginning, bringing challenges and opportunities that will test everything you've learned about survival in a world that offers no guarantees. Your second breeding season arrives with complications you didn't anticipate. The territory that seemed spacious enough for one family now feels cramped with adolescent offspring who haven't dispersed yet, and a pregnant mate who needs additional space and resources. The math doesn't work. Too many mouths competing for the same food sources, too many bodies requiring shelter in burrows designed for smaller numbers. The first serious conflict erupts between you and your oldest offspring over access to the richest beetle larval bed in your territory. What should have been a simple matter of established hierarchy becomes a genuine challenge to your authority. Your offspring has grown large enough to pose a real threat, confident enough to question your decisions, and hungry enough to risk confrontation over prime feeding areas. The fight is awkward and emotionally devastating. You're battling someone you've spent months teaching and protecting, using skills you helped them develop against your own interests. But territorial law doesn't recognize family sentiment. Resources go to whoever can claim and defend them, regardless of genetic relationships. You win through experience and superior knowledge of the terrain, but victory feels hollow when your opponent limps away with wounds you inflicted. Your mate's second pregnancy progresses differently from her first. She's older now, more experienced, but also more worn down by the constant demands of territorial life. The previous birth took a toll that hasn't fully healed, and her body responds to pregnancy with less resilience than before. Her hunting capacity decreases earlier, her nutritional needs increase more dramatically, and her protective instincts become almost pathologically intense. The dispersal of your first offspring happens gradually rather than all at once. One simply disappears during a routine hunting expedition and never returns. No farewell, no territorial dispute, just absence where presence used to be. The second lingers for weeks, clearly reluctant to leave familiar territory, but increasingly unwelcome as resources become scarce. The third requires active eviction when peaceful encouragement fails to motivate departure. Each departure creates a mixture of relief and loss that you're not equipped to process. The immediate practical benefits, more food, more space, reduced competition, are obvious and welcome. But the emotional aftermath leaves you feeling hollow in ways that survival instincts don't address. The burrow chambers that once echoed with family activity now feel too large and too quiet. Your hunting efficiency improves dramatically once territorial pressure decreases, but the improvement feels temporary rather than sustainable. Your body is showing signs of wear that weren't apparent during your younger years. Your claws are more worn, your reflexes slightly slower, your recovery time from strenuous activity noticeably longer. Age is becoming a factor in survival calculations that once seemed purely theoretical. The birth of your second litter brings familiar challenges with new complications. These offspring seem smaller and more fragile than your first group, requiring more intensive care and showing slower development patterns. Whether this reflects your mate's decreased vitality, environmental changes, or simply random genetic variation, the result is increased parental demands during a period when your own capabilities are beginning to decline. Your territorial defense becomes more strategic and less physically confrontational. Direct combat carries risks that seemed acceptable when you were younger and more resilient, but now require careful evaluation of costs versus benefits. You rely increasingly on reputation, territorial knowledge, and psychological intimidation rather than brute force to maintain your boundaries. A serious injury during a routine hunting expedition provides harsh insight into your changing situation. What should have been a minor scrape from a sharp rock becomes infected, limiting your mobility for weeks while your mate struggles to support the family alone. The incident forces recognition that your invulnerability was always an illusion, but one that becomes more dangerous to maintain as physical capabilities decline. Your mate begins showing signs of strain that extend beyond normal parental stress. Her grooming becomes less thorough, her territorial awareness less acute, her response to offspring demands less immediate. The cumulative toll of multiple pregnancies, constant resource pressure, and territorial maintenance is wearing her down in ways that threaten the entire family's survival prospects. The territory that once seemed perfectly suited to your needs now reveals limitations that weren't apparent during establishment. Soil erosion has affected some of your best digging areas. Seasonal weather patterns have shifted water availability, and increasing predator activity has made previously safe zones dangerous. Adaptation becomes necessary, but adaptation requires energy reserves that are increasingly scarce. Your second litter develops more slowly than their predecessors, requiring extended parental investment during a period when your capacity for such investment is diminishing. Teaching hunting techniques becomes more exhausting, territorial expansion more difficult, resource provision more challenging. You're being asked to do more at precisely the time when you're capable of doing less. The first major territorial challenge since your offspring's birth comes from an unexpected source, a coalition of younger armadillos who have apparently decided that your declining capabilities make you vulnerable to coordinated pressure. The threat isn't immediate physical confrontation, but systematic encroachment, designed to gradually erode your territorial boundaries through persistent low-level pressure. Your response requires careful planning rather than instinctive reaction. Direct confrontation with multiple opponents would be suicidal, but allowing systematic erosion would eventually destroy your resource base entirely. You develop a strategy of selective engagement, defending critical areas while yielding marginal territory, concentrating your limited energy on battles you can win rather than fighting on all fronts simultaneously. The strategy succeeds partially, but at significant cost. You maintain control of essential resources while losing territory that once provided security margins during difficult periods. Your reduced territorial size increases vulnerability to future challenges while decreasing the resource base needed to support family survival. It's a sustainable solution only if no additional pressures emerge. Your mate's health continues declining in ways that affect the entire family's prospects. Her milk production decreases, forcing earlier weaning than optimal for offspring development. Her hunting contributions drop, placing additional pressure on your already strained capabilities. Her territorial awareness becomes unreliable, creating security gaps that you must compensate for through increased vigilance. The realization dawns gradually that this breeding season will likely be your last successful one. Your mate's declining condition makes future pregnancies increasingly risky. Your own aging body struggles with current demands, and your reduced territory may not support additional family expansion. The genetic legacy you've worked to establish has probably reached its maximum extent. Your current offspring begin displaying the independence behaviors that signal approaching dispersal time, but their development remains slower than normal. Extended parental investment will be required, stretching your resources during a period when resource generation is becoming more difficult. The timing creates potential conflicts between current offspring needs and your own survival requirements. A close call with a hawk provides brutal reminder of mortality's constant presence. Your reflexes, once quick enough to avoid aerial predators easily, now require conscious effort and careful positioning to maintain safety margins. The near miss leaves you shaken, not just by immediate danger, but by recognition that such encounters will become increasingly difficult to survive as aging continues. Your territory begins showing signs of overuse that weren't apparent during peak management years. Insect populations in your primary hunting areas are declining from intensive exploitation. Soil structure in heavily excavated zones is becoming unstable, and regeneration rates for damaged areas are falling behind utilization rates. Sustainability requires changes that your current situation makes difficult to implement. The decision to reduce territorial size becomes necessity rather than choice when your capacity to maintain extensive boundaries drops below minimum effectiveness levels. You consolidate around core areas that provide essential resources while abandoning peripheral zones that require more energy to defend than they contribute to family survival. It's strategic retreat, disguised as tactical reorganization. Your mate's condition stabilizes at a reduced level of capability that becomes the new normal for family operations. She can still contribute to hunting and offspring care, but her capacity is limited enough that family survival depends increasingly on your ability to compensate for her reduced contributions. The partnership that once balanced capabilities now requires you to carry disproportionate responsibility. Your offspring's delayed development creates extended dependency that strains resources during a critical period. Their hunting skills improve slowly, their territorial awareness remains limited, and their physical capabilities lag behind normal timelines. Whether environmental factors, genetic variations, or parental age effects are responsible, the result is increased demands during decreased capacity to meet them. The first of your second litter finally achieves independence and departs without ceremony, following the same pattern as their older siblings. The departure provides immediate resource relief, but also psychological impact that seems heavier than previous experiences. Each successful offspring represents achievement, but each departure feels more like loss as your own future becomes less certain. Your hunting patterns shift toward lower energy, higher certainty strategies that prioritize reliability over maximum return. Risky excavations that might yield exceptional rewards are abandoned in favor of proven techniques with predictable outcomes. Conservative resource management becomes essential as the margins for error continue shrinking with advancing age. A respiratory infection during the wet season provides harsh lesson in vulnerability that youth had obscured. What should have been a minor illness becomes a major threat when combined with reduced immunity, increased stress, and limited recovery resources. You survive, but the experience clarifies how narrow the line between life and death has become as your body ages. Your territory's productivity continues declining under intensive use, forcing difficult decisions about resource allocation and family priorities. Supporting current offspring through independence competes with maintaining adequate reserves for your own survival, creating conflicts that have no perfect solutions. Every choice involves trade-offs that will affect long-term prospects in ways that can't be fully predicted. Your mate begins showing interest in potential den sites that could accommodate another breeding cycle, but her physical condition makes successful reproduction increasingly unlikely. The hormonal drives that once ensured genetic continuation now conflict with practical realities that make family expansion dangerous for everyone involved. Biology and reality are diverging in ways that create emotional tensions without clear resolutions. Your remaining offspring finally achieve sufficient independence to begin their own dispersal process, but their departure timeline extends longer than previous generations. Whether increased caution, reduced capability, or environmental pressures are responsible, the result is extended family responsibility during a period when your capacity for such responsibility is declining toward critical minimums. The territory that once represented achievement and security now feels like a burden that requires constant maintenance without providing adequate returns. Boundary defense consumes energy that hunting requires, burrow maintenance demands time that family needs, and resource generation struggles to keep pace with consumption patterns that can't be significantly reduced. Your mate's final departure comes without warning or ceremony. One morning, she simply isn't there. No signs of struggle, no evidence of predation, no indication of where she went or why. Her absence transforms the territory from family home to solitary refuge, changing fundamental assumptions about resource requirements and survival strategies that had governed your existence for years. The loneliness hits harder than expected, creating psychological pressures that pure survival instinct doesn't address. The burrow chambers designed for family occupation now echo with emptiness that makes rest difficult and security feel incomplete. Social isolation, which once seemed like a return to natural armadillo existence, now feels like punishment for reasons you can't identify. Your hunting efficiency improves temporarily with reduced family demands, but the improvement masks underlying decline in physical capabilities that family responsibilities had previously obscured. Without the motivation of providing for others, your own survival needs seem both easier to meet and less compelling to pursue. Purpose becomes a question that survival instincts don't answer. The territory that once required constant expansion and defense now seems too large for effective management by a single aging armadillo. Areas that once provided critical resources become impossible to maintain. Boundaries that once represented achievement become vulnerabilities that attracted challenges from younger, more capable competitors seeking territorial expansion opportunities. Your first major health crisis arrives during what should have been routine hunting activity. A combination of overexertion, inadequate nutrition, and accumulated wear creates a collapse that leaves you stranded far from shelter during daylight hours when predators are most active. Recovery requires days of careful rest that use up reserves you can't easily replace. The incident forces recognition that independent survival may no longer be sustainable at previous activity levels. Your body's capacity for recovery has diminished to the point where minor mistakes can have major consequences. Routine activities carry increased risks, and safety margins that once seemed adequate now require constant recalculation based on declining capabilities. Your territorial boundaries begin contracting not through external pressure, but through internal recognition that extensive holdings require maintenance energy you no longer possess. Core areas that provide essential resources receive adequate attention, while peripheral zones are gradually abandoned to competitors who recognize opportunity in your reduced presence. The seasonal cycle that once provided reliable rhythm for territorial management now presents challenges that strain your adaptive capacity. Weather patterns that were manageable during peak years now require careful preparation and resource management. Food availability fluctuations demand strategic planning that extends beyond immediate needs, and threat levels that were once routine now approach your maximum response capability. Your first winter alone, since achieving territorial independence, brings psychological challenges that pure survival skills don't address. The burrow that once provided comfortable refuge chamber, the Redus now feels like isolation activity levels that conserve energy also create time for thoughts that survival-focused existence previously didn't allow. Existence becomes contemplation rather than action, bringing questions that have no practical answers. Spring arrives with familiar scents and sounds that once drove territorial expansion and resource development, but your response to seasonal changes lacks the enthusiasm. The increased insect activity that should trigger intensive hunting instead presents as opportunity that requires more energy investment than your depleted reserves can support. Motivation becomes a luxury that survival margins no longer accommodate. Your hunting patterns shift toward opportunistic feeding rather than systematic exploitation of territorial resources. The methodical excavation techniques that once yielded reliable results now demand energy expenditure that leaves you vulnerable to extended recovery periods. You begin targeting surface insects and easily accessible prey, accepting lower nutritional returns in exchange for reduced physical demands. The territory that once buzzed with activity now operates on minimal maintenance schedules that prioritize immediate survival over long-term sustainability. Boundary markers receive sporadic attention, burrow systems get emergency repairs rather than systematic upgrades, and resource monitoring becomes reactive rather than proactive. You're managing decline rather than building success. A territorial challenge from a younger armadillo forces recognition of how dramatically your defensive capabilities have diminished. The confrontation doesn't escalate to physical violence. Your challenger recognizes your weakness and simply begins hunting in areas you can no longer effectively defend. Territory shrinks through acknowledgement rather than conquest, reducing your holdings to what you can actually protect. Your remaining core territory encompasses the original burrow system where you once raised family, the most reliable water source within reasonable travel distance, and the beetle larval beds that require minimal excavation energy while providing adequate nutrition. Everything else becomes contested ground that you can't afford to defend against determined challengers seeking territorial expansion. The isolation deepens as neighboring armadillos recognize your declining status and adjust their territorial boundaries accordingly. What were once negotiated borders become zones of gradual encroachment as younger, stronger competitors test your response capabilities and find them inadequate. Your reputation shifts from formidable territorial holder to aging obstacle awaiting removal. Your physical decline accelerates during periods of stress that once would have prompted adaptive responses. Poor weather that previously meant temporary hunting difficulties now creates extended periods of inadequate nutrition that your body struggles to recover from. The resilience that once bounced back from setbacks now requires increasingly longer recovery periods for decreasing levels of restoration. The burrow system begins showing signs of structural deterioration that your reduced maintenance capacity can't address effectively. Tunnel walls that once received regular reinforcement develop weak spots that threaten collapse during heavy rains. Chamber drainage that once operated efficiently now requires constant attention to prevent flooding that could destroy your primary shelter. Your hunting success rate drops to levels that barely sustain basic metabolic requirements during periods of normal environmental conditions. Weather variations, seasonal food fluctuations, or temporary increases in territorial pressure now create deficits that your body can't compensate for through increased efficiency or extended activity periods. Survival becomes a daily question rather than assumed an outcome. A minor injury during routine foraging becomes a major threat when your reduced healing capacity can't address tissue damage effectively. What should have been a few days of limited activity stretches into weeks of vulnerability, during which your territorial position deteriorates further and your nutritional status drops toward critical levels. Recovery becomes partial rather than complete. The territory that once supported a thriving family now struggles to sustain a single aging armadillo operating at reduced capacity levels. Food sources that seemed abundant when exploitation was efficient now appear inadequate when harvesting requires maximum effort for minimum returns. Resource scarcity becomes the dominant factor in every survival decision. Your behavioral patterns shift toward risk-averse strategies that prioritize immediate safety over long-term territorial maintenance. Areas that once received regular patrol attention are abandoned to competitors who recognize that challenges will meet minimal resistance. Defensive responses become symbolic rather than effective, maintaining dignity while acknowledging practical limitations. The seasonal rhythms that once provided reliable structure for territorial management now present as challenges that strain your adaptive capacity beyond comfortable margins. Spring's increased activity demands exceed your energy reserves. Summer's heat stress requires cooling strategies you can't sustain, and autumn's preparation needs outstrip your resource generation capabilities. Your first serious predator encounter since entering old age reveals how dramatically your escape capabilities have deteriorated. The hawk that once would have posed manageable threat now represents potentially fatal danger that you avoid through luck rather than skill. Aerial predators begin adjusting their hunting patterns to account for your reduced mobility and reaction time. The core territory that represents your final holdout begins experiencing resource depletion from intensive use without adequate management. Insect populations in your primary feeding areas drop below sustainable levels, forcing exploitation of marginal resources that provide insufficient nutrition for the energy required to harvest them. Ecological balance shifts from renewable harvesting to resource mining. Your grooming standards decline as energy allocation priorities contribute directly to short-term survival. The mese's immediate survival needs over-maintenance activities that Donticulus shell care that once provided protection and social signaling becomes sporadic attention to critical areas only. Appearance becomes irrelevant when survival requires every available resource. The burrow that once provided comfortable refuge now feels like a trap during periods when extended surface time becomes necessary for adequate foraging. underground safety conflicts with surface feeding requirements, creating impossible choices between shelter security and nutritional needs. Neither option provides adequate solutions to simultaneously address both requirements. Your hunting territory contracts to areas immediately surrounding your primary burrow as travel costs exceed the nutritional value of distant food sources. The varied diet that once provided balanced nutrition gives way to opportunistic feeding on whatever insects can be found within minimal energy expenditure range. Dietary quality becomes luxury that survival margins can't support. A respiratory infection during the wet season nearly proves fatal when your compromised immune system can't mount effective resistance to pathogens that healthy armadillos would eliminate routinely. The illness persists for weeks, draining energy reserves that take months to partially restore. Each health crisis leaves permanent deficits that compound future vulnerability. Your territorial awareness becomes limited to immediate surroundings, as the energy required for extended reconnaissance exceeds your capacity for such monitoring. Threats that once would have been detected and avoided now approach without warning, forcing reactive responses that your reduced capabilities struggle to execute effectively. Situational awareness shrinks to match available energy budgets. The water source that anchors your remaining territory begins showing signs of seasonal unreliability that your reduced mobility makes difficult to address through alternative supply development. Drought conditions that once prompted temporary range expansion now create potential survival crises that your current capabilities can't resolve through increased travel or resource development. Your sleep patterns become irregular as physical discomfort from accumulated injuries and chronic conditions interferes with normal rest cycles. The deep, restorative sleep that once recharged your energy reserves gives way to fragmented rest periods that provide insufficient recovery for daily survival activities. Fatigue becomes constant rather than temporary. The insect populations in your core hunting areas show signs of systematic depletion as your reduced territorial range concentrates feeding pressure on limited resources. Regeneration rates fall behind exploitation rates, creating downward spirals in food availability that your constrained territorial options can't address through range expansion or habitat diversification. Your final territorial boundary dispute ends not through victory or defeat, but through exhausted withdrawal from areas you can no longer defend effectively. The younger challenger doesn't pursue total displacement. Your remaining territory apparently isn't worth the effort required for complete conquest. You retain minimal holdings through irrelevance rather than strength. The burrow system that once represented architectural achievement now requires constant emergency maintenance to prevent catastrophic failure. Structural repairs consume energy reserves needed for hunting, creating competition between shelter security and nutritional adequacy that has no satisfactory resolution. Infrastructure maintenance becomes survival threatening rather than survival supporting. Your foraging efficiency drops to levels where successful hunting trips barely provide enough nutrition to recover from the energy expenditure required for the hunting activity itself. The positive feedback loop that once rewarded successful hunting with increased capacity for future hunting reverses into negative feedback where hunting success fails to compensate for hunting costs. A severe weather event that once would have represented temporary inconvenience now creates extended survival crisis as your reduced reserves and compromised shelter can't buffer environmental stresses effectively. Storm damage to your burrow system requires repairs that exceed your construction capacity, forcing occupation of inadequate temporary shelters during extended recovery periods. Your mobility becomes limited to essential movements only as joint stiffness and muscle weakness make routine travel increasingly painful and exhausting. The territory that once felt comfortably scaled to your activity patterns now seems impossibly vast when crossing it, requires maximum effort and extended recovery time. Distance becomes measured in energy costs rather than physical space. The isolation intensifies as other armadillos recognize your declining condition and avoid territorial interactions that once provided minimal social contact. Your scent markers apparently communicate weakness rather than territorial claims, eliminating even the brief encounters that occasionally broke the monotony of solitary existence. Social contact becomes memory rather than current experience. Your final hunting success comes during an unusually favorable combination of accessible prey and adequate energy reserves that allows one last efficient foraging session. The beetles you uncover provide nutrition that temporarily restores something approaching normal energy levels, creating brief illusion that decline might be reversible rather than inevitable. The temporary improvement proves fleeting as your body's reduced capacity for nutrient processing fails to sustain the brief energy surge that successful hunting provided. Within days, you return to baseline functionality that barely sustains basic survival requirements. The hunting success becomes cruel reminder of capabilities that no longer exist rather than evidence of potential recovery. Your territory shrinks to the immediate vicinity of your primary burrow as travel beyond minimal distances becomes impossible without risking collapse far from shelter. The world that once seemed knowable and navigable contracts to a few square meters of familiar ground that represent the entirety of your remaining existence. Exploration becomes memory rather than possibility. The final predator encounter doesn't involve dramatic chase or narrow escape. You simply lack the energy to flee when a fox appears near your burrow entrance during daylight hours. The predator investigates briefly, but apparently decides you're not worth the effort required for capture. Survival through irrelevance, rather than capability, marks the ultimate degradation of your once formidable defensive abilities. Your body begins shutting down non-essential functions as energy allocation prioritizes basic metabolic requirements over activities like grooming, territorial maintenance, or extended foraging. Consciousness becomes intermittent as your brain conserves resources by reducing awareness during periods when environmental monitoring doesn't require active attention. The burrow that once bustled with family activity becomes your final refuge as mobility limitations make surface travel impossible except for emergency situations. The chamber that witnessed your offspring's first steps now provides the only environment you can navigate without risking fatal exhaustion. Your world contracts to walls you excavated during more capable years. Your last successful hunt yields a single small beetle that provides barely enough nutrition to sustain consciousness for another day. The effort required to locate, excavate, and consume this minimal meal exhausts your remaining energy reserves, leaving you too weak to attempt another foraging expedition. Starvation becomes inevitable rather than possible. The sounds of the surface world continue filtering down through your burrow ceiling, but they no longer trigger the investigative responses that once characterized your territorial awareness. Other armadillos move through areas that were once your domain. Birds call from positions that once demanded monitoring, and the general activity of life continues without your participation or concern. Your breathing becomes irregular as your respiratory system struggles with the basic gas exchange required for cellular function. Each breath requires conscious effort that leaves less energy available for other survival activities. The automatic processes that once operated without attention now demand the full focus of your remaining consciousness to maintain minimal functionality. The final day arrives without ceremony or obvious the point where energy expenditure require markers. Your body simply reaches for basic survival, exceeds energy generation capacity from all available sources. Your heart continues beating for a while after consciousness fades, but the pink fairy armadillo, who once claimed this territory through strength and determination, has already departed. Your shell, which protected you through countless dangers and provided identity throughout your existence, becomes empty armor surrounding tissues that no longer maintain the spark of individual consciousness. The pink coloration that defined your species gradually fades as blood circulation ceases and cellular processes wind down to complete stillness. The burrow that witnessed your entire adult existence remains structurally sound for weeks after your departure, providing temporary shelter for passing insects and small creatures who don't recognize the significance of the architecture they're exploring. Eventually, seasonal rains and soil settling will obscure the chambers where you lived, loved, raised offspring, and finally succumbed to the inevitable progression of biological time. Your territory becomes available for redistribution among surviving armadillos who will establish their own boundaries, excavate their own burrows, and create their own stories of survival, reproduction, and eventual decline. The cycle continues with new participants who face the same challenges and opportunities that shaped your own existence from birth through death. The legacy you leave exists primarily in the genetic material you successfully transmitted through offspring who survived to reproduce themselves. Your territorial improvements may benefit future residents, your hunting techniques might be rediscovered by others, and your story becomes part of the larger narrative of pink fairy armadillo survival in environments that offer no guarantees but reward persistence, adaptability, and the courage to claim space in a world full of creatures trying to do the same thing. Your genetic contribution to the future extends beyond simple reproduction statistics. The 3 offspring from your first successful breeding season managed to establish their own territories with varying degrees of success that reflected the individual traits they inherited from you and your mate. One became particularly skilled at deep excavation, carving out burrows in soil types that other armadillos avoided. Another developed exceptional speed that allowed exploitation of surface food sources that required quick reflexes to capture. The third combined caution with efficiency, establishing a modest but sustainable territory that supported steady reproduction over multiple seasons. Your second litter faced greater challenges during their development, but 2 of the 3 survived to independence and eventual reproduction. Their slower early development actually provided advantages in some situations. They learned patience and careful evaluation of risks that served them well during territorial establishment. The extended time they spent observing your hunting techniques gave them deeper understanding of resource management than armadillos who dispersed earlier with less comprehensive training. The territorial knowledge you accumulated during your lifetime influenced the local armadillo population in subtle but significant ways. Your systematic exploitation of beetle larval beds created harvesting patterns that subsequent territorial holders adopted and refined. The burrow construction techniques you developed for sandy soil conditions became templates that other armadillos copied when establishing their own shelter systems. Your defensive strategies against aerial predators influenced territorial layout decisions throughout the area. The ecosystem modifications you made during peak territorial management continue affecting local conditions long after your departure. The excavation work that created your burrow network altered soil drainage patterns in ways that influence insect population distributions. Areas where you concentrated hunting activity show different vegetation patterns because your digging affected root systems and seed dispersal. The territory you shaped through years of occupation carries your influence forward in forms that transcend individual survival. Your mate's eventual disappearance followed patterns common among aging pink fairy armadillos who recognize that continued territorial occupation becomes liability rather than asset. She likely moved to marginal areas where competition was reduced, but resource availability was also limited. Her survival probably extended only briefly beyond her departure from your shared territory, but her genetic contribution through successful offspring reproduction ensures continuation of her lineage despite individual mortality. The territorial boundaries you established and defended became part of the local armadillo geography that influences settlement patterns for subsequent generations. Young armadillos dispersing from natal territories encounter boundary systems that reflect decisions you made about resource allocation, defensive positioning, and optimal hunting ground distribution. Your territorial legacy shapes the landscape that future armadillos must navigate during their own establishment attempts. The hunting techniques you developed through trial and error become part of the local behavioral repertoire as observers copied successful strategies and abandoned unsuccessful ones. Your innovations in extracting beetles from hard-packed soil, your methods for locating ant colonies in sandy areas, and your timing strategies for avoiding predator activity influenced armadillo behavior patterns throughout the region. Individual learning becomes collective knowledge through observation and imitation. The seasonal adaptations you perfected during your territorial tenure provide templates for survival strategies that other armadillos encounter and evaluate. Your responses to drought conditions, your preparation techniques for cold seasons, and your resource conservation methods during times of scarcity become part of the environmental knowledge base that helps subsequent generations survive similar challenges. Experience becomes inheritance through behavioral transmission. Your offspring's reproductive success multiplies your genetic influence through subsequent generations that carry diluted but persistent traces of your hereditary contributions. Grandchildren you never meet inherit hunting instincts you developed, territorial preferences you discovered, and survival strategies you perfected. The genetic lottery distributes your biological legacy across expanding populations of armadillos who benefit from evolutionary innovations that your survival struggles helped refine. The predator avoidance techniques you developed through close calls and successful escapes influence local armadillo survival rates as effective strategies spread through observation and learning. Your methods for detecting aerial threats, your escape routes from ground predators, and your camouflage techniques during dangerous periods become part of the survival toolkit that helps other armadillos navigate similar threats. Individual experience becomes collective advantage through knowledge transfer. Your territorial management strategies influence land use patterns that affect multiple species beyond armadillos. The areas you kept clear through systematic hunting provide foraging opportunities for birds seeking exposed insects. The soil disturbance from your excavation activities creates microhabitats that support different plant communities. Your territory becomes part of a larger ecological network that your activities helped shape and maintain. The timing of your reproductive efforts influenced population dynamics in ways that extended beyond your immediate family. Your successful breeding during favorable environmental conditions contributed to population growth that increased territorial competition for subsequent generations. Your offspring entered a demographic landscape that reflected the reproductive decisions of your generation, creating competitive pressures that shaped evolutionary selection for the next generation of armadillos. Your response to environmental changes during your lifetime provided data points in the larger pattern of species adaptation to shifting ecological conditions. Your territorial adjustments to altered weather patterns, your dietary modifications in response to changing insect populations, and your behavioral adaptations to increased predator pressure became part of the collective species response to environmental challenges that continue affecting pink fairy armadillo survival. The burrow architecture you developed influenced construction standards that subsequent territorial holders adopted and modified. Your innovations in chamber design, your solutions to drainage problems, and your improvements in tunnel stability became part of the engineering knowledge that helps armadillos create more effective shelter systems. Individual innovation becomes collective advancement through imitation and improvement of successful designs. Your interactions with neighboring armadillos established social precedents that influence territorial negotiation patterns throughout the region. Your methods for resolving boundary disputes, your strategies for resource sharing during emergencies, and your techniques for avoiding unnecessary conflicts became part of the behavioral repertoire that helps armadillos coexist within limited geographic areas. Individual behavior becomes social norm through repeated successful application. The stress responses you developed during challenging periods provide physiological templates that help subsequent generations cope with similar pressures. Your metabolic adjustments during food scarcity, your behavioral modifications during predator pressure, and your energy conservation techniques during harsh weather become part of the adaptive toolkit that improves survival rates for armadillos facing comparable challenges. Individual adaptation becomes inherited capability through genetic and behavioral transmission. Your territorial legacy persists in landscape modifications that continue influencing local ecology decades after your death. The soil structure changes from your excavation work, the vegetation patterns altered by your hunting activities, and the water flow modifications from your burrow construction create environmental conditions that support different species communities. Your individual impact becomes ecosystem influence through accumulated environmental modification. The reproductive timing strategies you employed influenced genetic diversity patterns in the local armadillo population. Your breeding decisions during optimal environmental conditions contributed to genetic combinations that proved successful in subsequent generations. Your mate selection criteria and territorial requirements created reproductive pressures that influenced evolutionary selection for traits that improve survival in your specific ecological niche. Your survival story becomes part of the larger narrative of pink fairy armadillo adaptation to environmental challenges that continue shaping species evolution. Your successful navigation of territorial competition, resource scarcity, predator pressure, and reproductive challenges provides one data point in the massive dataset of individual experiences that collectively determine species survival strategies and evolutionary trajectories. The hunting grounds you developed and maintained become part of the territorial inheritance that subsequent armadillos evaluate and potentially claim. Your systematic exploitation of food resources created productivity patterns that influence land value assessments for future territorial holders. The areas you improved through careful management become premium real estate that supports successful reproduction for armadillos capable of claiming and defending these enhanced territories. Your defensive innovations influence survival rates throughout the local armadillo population as effective techniques spread through observation and imitation. Your camouflage strategies, your escape route planning, and your threat assessment methods become part of the collective defense knowledge that improves survival odds for armadillos facing similar predator pressures. Individual creativity becomes species advantage through behavioral transmission and refinement. The resource management techniques you perfected during periods of scarcity provide survival templates that help other armadillos navigate similar challenges. Your food storage methods, your energy conservation strategies, and your efficiency improvements during resource limitation become part of the survival toolkit that enables armadillo populations to persist through difficult environmental periods. Individual innovation becomes collective resilience through knowledge sharing. Your territorial boundaries established precedents for land use patterns that influence armadillo distribution across the landscape. The size requirements you demonstrated, the resource density thresholds you established, and the defensive positioning you perfected become part of the territorial calculation matrix that guides establishment decisions for subsequent generations. Individual success becomes species knowledge through behavioral observation and imitation. The seasonal adaptation strategies you developed influence survival techniques that help armadillo populations cope with environmental variability. Your responses to weather extremes, your dietary adjustments to seasonal food availability, and your activity modifications during challenging periods become part of the adaptive repertoire that improves population survival rates during environmental stress. Individual flexibility becomes species resilience through behavioral transmission. So, your mate selection criteria and reproductive strategies influence genetic diversity maintenance in the local armadillo population. Your evaluation of territorial quality, your assessment of partner fitness, and your timing of reproductive efforts contribute to breeding patterns that maintain genetic variation necessary for long-term population survival. Individual choice becomes population genetics through accumulated reproductive decisions across multiple generations. The ecological relationships you established during territorial occupation influence community structure in ways that extend beyond armadillo populations. Your interactions with prey species, your modifications to habitat structure, and your influence on predator behavior patterns become part of the ecological network that supports biodiversity in your former territory. Individual ecology becomes ecosystem function through accumulated species interactions. Your survival achievements represent one successful navigation of the challenges that define pink fairy armadillo existence. The territory you claimed, the offspring you raised, the techniques you developed, and the knowledge you accumulated become part of the larger story of species persistence in environments that test every aspect of biological adaptation. Your individual success contributes to collective survival in ways that extend far beyond your personal lifetime. The legacy continues through descendants who carry forward genetic combinations tested by your survival challenges, territorial knowledge refined through your experience, and behavioral innovations proven through your success. The cycle repeats with new participants who face similar challenges while benefiting from the accumulated wisdom of previous generations, including the contributions you made through your determined persistence in claiming and defending your place in a world that offered no guarantees but rewarded those brave enough to try. Your death creates ripples that extend far beyond the simple cessation of your individual existence. Within hours, The scent of your passing begins attracting attention from creatures who recognize opportunity in mortality. Small scavengers investigate your burrow entrance, drawn by chemical signals that communicate the availability of resources no longer defended by living will. The insects you once hunted begin recolonizing areas that your presence had kept under systematic exploitation pressure, and colonies expand their foraging ranges into territories that were previously too dangerous to enter. Beetle populations recover in locations where your excavation activities had maintained constant predation pressure. The absence of a single small predator creates cascading effects throughout the local food web. Your burrow system becomes valuable real estate in ways you never anticipated during its construction. A family of field mice discovers the entrance tunnel and begins expanding the chambers to accommodate their different spatial requirements. The architectural foundation you created through months of exhausting excavation work provides shelter for creatures who will never know the armadillo who made their survival possible. The territory you defended so fiercely becomes contested ground within days of your departure. Neighboring armadillos begin probing the boundaries you once maintained through constant vigilance, testing whether the scent markers still carry the threat of active defense. Your carefully established territorial boundaries start dissolving as competitors realize that encroachment will meet no resistance. A young female armadillo, recently dispersed from her natal territory, discovers your former holdings. During her desperate search for unclaimed ground, she investigates the burrow system with the careful attention of someone who recognizes quality construction, even if she doesn't understand the history behind the architecture. Your excavation work becomes her inheritance, passed from one generation to the next through the simple mechanism of territorial succession. She begins making modifications to suit her own needs and preferences, widening some passages while narrowing others, adding new chambers while abandoning sections that don't fit her behavioral patterns. The burrow system evolves beyond your original design, but the fundamental structure you created provides the foundation for improvements that will serve armadillo residents for years to come. The hunting grounds you developed through systematic exploration and careful exploitation become part of her territorial knowledge as she learns the productive areas through trial and error. The beetle larval beds you discovered remain productive. The ant colony locations you identified continue yielding food, and the seasonal water sources you mapped still provide essential resources. Your territorial intelligence becomes her survival advantage, but she faces challenges you never encountered during your territorial establishment. The local armadillo population has grown since your successful breeding seasons contributed offspring to the regional demographics. Competition for resources has intensified, territorial boundaries have become more contested, and the environmental conditions have shifted in ways that make survival more difficult than during your peak years. The techniques you developed for hunting in sandy soil become part of her learning process as she observes the excavation patterns left by your previous activities, the efficient angles you discovered for tunnel construction, the optimal chamber sizes you determined through experience, and the drainage solutions you implemented become templates that guide her own construction efforts. Individual innovation becomes collective knowledge through archaeological investigation. Your genetic legacy continues spreading through offspring who have established their own territories and begun their own reproductive cycles. Grandchildren you never met inherit combinations of traits that your survival success helps select and refine. The hunting instincts you developed, the territorial preferences you discovered, and the adaptive strategies you perfected become part of their biological inheritance through genetic transmission across generations. The environmental modifications you made during years of territorial occupation continue influencing local ecology in subtle but persistent ways. The soil composition changes from your excavation work affect water drainage patterns that influence plant growth. The selective pressure you applied to insect populations altered species composition in ways that persist beyond your individual hunting activities. Your territorial management becomes ecosystem engineering that extends far beyond personal survival. The new territorial holder faces predator pressures that have evolved since your successful defensive strategies helped establish local armadillo survival techniques. Hawks have adjusted their hunting patterns based on previous encounters with armadillos who employed your escape methods. Foxes have modified their search strategies in response to burrow construction techniques that you helped popularize throughout the region. Predator-prey dynamics continue evolving through cycles of adaptation and counter-adaptation. Her first successful breeding season produces offspring who benefit from territorial improvements you initiated decades earlier. The enhanced productivity of hunting grounds you developed, the superior shelter quality of burrow systems you designed, and the defensive advantages of territorial positioning you established provide survival benefits for armadillos who have no knowledge of your contributions to their success. The seasonal rhythms that once governed your territorial activities continue influencing armadillo behavior patterns throughout the region. The timing strategies you developed for optimal hunting, the resource conservation techniques you perfected during scarcity periods, and the weather preparation methods you employed during harsh seasons become part of the collective behavioral repertoire that improves survival rates for subsequent generations. Your territory becomes part of the larger landscape of armadillo occupation that shapes regional population dynamics and species distribution patterns. The territorial size you established, the resource requirements you demonstrated, and the defensive capabilities you proved become part of the calculation matrix that guides territorial establishment decisions for armadillos throughout the area. Individual achievement becomes species template through accumulated success stories. The reproductive strategies you employed influence genetic diversity maintenance in ways that extend far beyond your immediate offspring. Your mate selection criteria, your breeding timing decisions, and your parental investment patterns contribute to evolutionary pressures that shape species adaptation to changing environmental conditions. Individual choice becomes population genetics through the accumulated reproductive decisions of successful territorial holders. The hunting innovations you developed spread through the local armadillo population as effective techniques are observed, copied, and refined by subsequent practitioners. Your methods for extracting beetles from hard soil, your strategies for locating ant colonies, and your efficiency improvements for energy conservation become part of the technical knowledge that improves hunting success rates throughout the region. Individual creativity becomes collective advancement through behavioral transmission. The territorial boundaries you established become part of the geographic template that influences armadillo settlement patterns for decades after your departure. The defensible positions you identified, the resource distribution patterns you exploited, and the territorial size requirements you demonstrated become part of the landscape knowledge that guides establishment decisions for future generations of territorial holders. Your survival story becomes one data point in the massive data set of individual experiences that collectively determine species survival strategies and evolutionary trajectories. The challenges you faced, the solutions you developed, and the success you achieved contribute to the accumulated wisdom that helps pink fairy armadillos navigate environmental pressures that continue testing species adaptation capabilities. The defensive innovations you developed influence survival rates throughout the regional armadillo population as effective anti-predator techniques spread through observation and imitation. Your camouflage methods, your escape route planning, and your threat assessment strategies become part of the collective defense knowledge that improves survival odds for armadillos facing similar predator pressures throughout the area. The resource management techniques you perfected during challenging periods provide survival templates that help other armadillos navigate environmental difficulties. Your food storage methods, your energy conservation strategies, and your efficiency improvements during resource scarcity become part of the survival toolkit that enables armadillo populations to persist through difficult environmental conditions that periodically test species resilience. Your mate's genetic contributions continue influencing local armadillo populations through offspring who carry forward trait combinations that proved successful during your shared territorial occupation. Her hunting specializations, her territorial preferences, and her maternal strategies become part of the genetic inheritance that shapes behavioral patterns for subsequent generations of armadillos throughout the region. The ecological relationships you established during territorial occupation continue influencing community structure in ways that extend far beyond armadillo populations. Your predation pressure on insect species, your soil modification activities, and your influence on vegetation patterns through selective hunting create ecological effects that persist long after your individual presence has ended. Personal ecology becomes ecosystem function through accumulated environmental interactions. The burrow construction techniques you developed influence architectural standards that subsequent territorial holders adopt and modify according to their own needs and environmental conditions. Your innovations in chamber design, your solutions to drainage problems, and your improvements in structural stability become part of the engineering knowledge that helps armadillos create more effective shelter systems throughout the region. Your territorial management strategies influence land use patterns that affect multiple species beyond armadillos. The areas you maintained through systematic hunting, the soil disturbance patterns you created through excavation activities, and the vegetation modifications that resulted from your territorial occupation create habitat conditions that support different species communities throughout your former territory and beyond. That's the complete story of your existence as a pink fairy armadillo, from the moment you emerged as a helpless pink bundle in a dark burrow to your final breath in that same underground world you fought so hard to claim and defend. You faced impossible odds at every stage, survived challenges that claimed countless others, and managed to pass your genetic legacy forward before time finally caught up with you. It's a brutal existence, but one that's been playing out in the grasslands of Argentina for thousands of years, proving that sometimes the smallest creatures can be the most determined survivors in a world that never stops trying to kill them. Here you can find the next video. Until then, see you soon.